But Jeffrey Sachs makes it sound like the United States just didn't veto the two-state solution, then everything should be all right. Do you believe that?
Yeah,
Is
I
that
wish I
possible?
could.
Is it
Right?
two-state solution?
I love Jeffrey Sachs, and he's a wonderful man, but I just don't see that as a real option at this point. It's just that,
What would happen if the U.S. did? Like, let's just say that, okay, we didn't veto it, and then we say, okay, we recognize
yeah,
Palestine as a state. What does that mean? What happens?
right. Well, there would be tremendous anger within Israel, and they just might respond by lashing out further and creating facts on the ground, which they've already have, of which there are many already, and
Creating
there
what?
facts on the ground. It's just in other words,
Oh,
say the fact is that you've seen the maps of Israel, and the portion that's actually, of the West Bank that's actually under Palestinian control has been shrinking steadily since 1967, and now it's much less than half. They're just little green dots,
hmm.
where there used to be um, a solid green patch that's been broken up into very small dots. And then we're seeing the same thing happen in Gaza right now. I mean, Gaza again, it always suffered, but it was a contiguous Palestinian territory, and that was one thing that Gaza had going for it. But the Israelis, part of what they're doing right now is that they're breaking it up. They're giving it the West Bank treatment, and um, it's they're creating facts on the ground. You mean the UN can do this? Um, Now the U.S. would have to back it up. There have been UN resolutions, like there was a UN the Minsk Agreement was codified through a UN resolution, and we just ignored it. The signatories, Ukraine, France, Germany, just ignored it. Quite plainly sabotaged it. And so we could vote for it, and just if we don't back it up with real action, that doesn't mean anything. If we did back it up, that would mean like no more munitions and maybe, economic sanctions and that kind of thing. And Israel, being a very small, independent country, wouldn't be able to last very long. But I mean, it's just the extremism, the again this um, the people like Ben Gvir, these Kahanists that actually rule in larger and larger more and more sectors of Israeli society. Again, they were once on the fringe, and now they control the police. Now settlers were few and far between back there in the early '70s, and now they control most of the West Bank. And these people are gonna, they're like the ultranationalists in Ukraine. They're just not gonna. It may not make any sense. It may not be in their own interests, but they are going to fight to the death, and they do have nuclear weapons. So I think it's a very, very scary situation. I just don't think that there was a time when what Jeffrey Sachs said was true. I think if back in the '70s and even through the '80s, maybe if we had really um, meant what we said, we've always said that we've been in favor of a two-state solution, but we didn't really mean it. That's the truth. But if we had put some real muscle behind it, um, then perhaps it could have been achieved back then. I just think that day is past now.
Okay, so no two-state solution possible. So then that means even if we withdraw support in some way, the likelihood of Israel normalizing relations with its neighbors is pretty much non-existent, you would say, especially with all these settlers that are in the West Bank, right? That it's
Yeah,
not going to disappear.
yeah,
So then what we're looking at is what the only thing would be the destruction of the state of Israel, right? That's where this is all heading at some
yeah.
point.
It could. Yeah, I mean, it
Is
seems
there
like
any
they're
other solution? I mean,
well, there's a chance that people will come to their senses, and I just don't see it, though. I just don't see it.
so
I
if
would
that's what
like
we're
to believe
banking
it.
on,
Yeah,
massive reform, all
yeah,
800,000 settlers in the West Bank say, oops, sorry,
yeah.
shouldn't have done
Right,
this. We're going to pack up and we're going to move into Tel Aviv or
right.
Haifa or
I
something.
can see it happening again, for the reasons that we gave within the U.S. over the course of years. That seems to be the trend. A lot of people are waking up, but I just don't see it happening in Israel and everything. Actually, the trend is all going the other way. If at some point we begin to see that there is a large sector of Israeli society, and that has really woken up to the reality and does really renounce Zionism and is looking for truly to live as a normal nation. in that part of the world. Those people existed in the past and they had some power. But now they're just, those people are so few they just, for all practical purposes, don't exist in Israel.
It's so
And
crazy to me that Israel would always be so resistant to a two-state solution, because to me this is clearly the only way that Israel could survive. It has to, if you want to be here, you have to make friends with your neighbor. Not have to make friends, but you can't
yeah,
continually expand. You
right,
can't continually invade your neighbors' countries and take their homes and just and
right,
expect that that'll be okay. Like it's just insane that they didn't want a two-state solution.
yeah,
Like you guys, all right, congrats, you won the 1967 war or
right,
whatever. You took huge swaths of land that didn't belong to you. You got a modern colonial experiment and you captured a territory. Okay, it was wrong, and we'll have to hash out some things, I'm sure, in the future. But you could exist as a state if they stood there and they stopped and they tried to establish good relations with all their neighbors and trade and be a good neighbor instead of just constantly building up walls and shooting people.
hmm Well, yeah. Again, I think you do have to point the finger at the U.S. as being absolutely instrumental in all this, because is that faction, that refusal to consider the two-state solution was really only made possible by the U.S. The Israelis began to understand that the U.S. is not serious about the two-state solution, that they, in fact, they support this expansion into these territories. The Zionism is very much alive, which means a continual expansion, and that um, um, so all those factions, which were already quite powerful within Israel, they had the backing of the U.S. and those smaller and weaker factions that opposed the expansions of the West Bank. They were weakened by the fact that the U.S. wasn't backing them up. And so I think over time, if the U.S. had been firm and been actually honest about their commitment to the two-state solution, and they backed it up, Israel could have turned out to be a different place too, just like Ukraine could have turned out to be a different place. It was because I think of the support that was thrown to these, the more extreme members. The Zionists, the expansionists within Israel, and the ultranationalists in Ukraine, that these became, in large part. I don't think it's possible without that U.S. support over all those years. They wouldn't have become the dominant powers, because they would have been staring at this reality. It's just that, hey, we're kind of a weak country, and the U.S. has conditioned their support on our support for a two-state solution. Hey, let's be realistic. Let's achieve it. They never had to make that choice, and in fact, it was the people who clearly always wanted to seize the West Bank. Those are the people that ended up in the ascendancy.
Scary stuff, Dad. And it seems like from what you're saying that the ability to course correct is really not there. It's very difficult at this stage.
It's
for
very
Israel
difficult. We have
and the
it.
United States.
Again, history is full of surprises, and maybe, I said that there are maybe leaders in the future who can perform miracles. I just don't see them now. I just don't see them now.